A new sort of question is beginning to emerge in the ongoing struggle between electric utilities and the distributed solar energy industry. To what extent should utilities be obligated to respect the investment-backed expectations of existing solar energy customers when changing policies related to rooftop solar energy? Buying a rooftop solar array or entering into a long-term lease is often a very large financial investment. For instance, it's not uncommon for it to take more than a decade for a purchaser of a rooftop solar energy system to fully recoup its cost through electricity bill savings. Investments that take that long to begin generating positive returns involve some inherent risk, because it's usually impossible to know how electricity prices or other important factors might change that far into the future. Now, of course, electric utilities should be able to empathize with potential purchasers of rooftop solar energy systems, because utilities routinely make large, long-term investments to build things like power plants and transmission lines. Just like someone who's buying or leasing a rooftop solar array, a utility generally makes big financial commitments on the reasonable expectation that future policy changes won't unduly thwart the utility's ability to generate reasonable financial returns. And not surprisingly, when policy changes do threaten a utility's ability to earn a reasonable return on one of its big infrastructure investments, like a power plant or a transmission line, the utility is often quick to complain. Unfortunately, utilities increasingly seem far more concerned about protecting their own big energy investments than about respecting the distributed energy investments of their own customers. Consider, for instance, a recent rate change proposal by the large Arizona utility Salt River Project, or SRP. SRP wants to impose charges of roughly $50 per month on all customers who get new rooftop solar energy systems. Now, the idea of singling out solar energy users and imposing a hefty fee on them is troubling enough in itself, but even more troubling is the way that SRP intends to treat customers who already have solar panels. SRP plans to allow these existing solar energy users to avoid the massive new fees that it's imposing for 10 years. But after that 10-year period, even customers who purchased or leased solar arrays long before SRP ever announced the new monthly fees would be required to start paying them. Even worse, SRP says that customers with existing solar arrays who sell their home will not be able to transfer even those 10-year exemption rights to their buyers. So the buyers would immediately be on the hook for the $50 in monthly fees. SRP's proposal displays an astounding level of disregard for the investment-backed expectations of thousands of SRP customers who already have solar panels. Those customers invested in their rooftop solar energy systems on the reasonable assumption that future policy changes would not substantially undermine their investment. The mere 10-year exemption period under SRP's new solar fee proposal would do just that. It would also set a dangerous precedent that could have a chilling effect on solar energy installations throughout Arizona and potentially even in other states. Now, in other areas of the law, courts and policymakers have repeatedly acknowledged the need to respect citizens' investment-backed expectations when making policy changes. Consider, for example, how these matters are handled in the area of zoning law. Suppose that a landowner spends hundreds of thousands of dollars to construct a gas station on a suburban street corner. Then, a year or two later, the local government adopts a zoning ordinance that prohibits gas stations in that part of town. Well, once the new ordinance becomes law, the gas station would be what is called a pre-existing non-conforming use. Importantly, rather than shutting the gas station down immediately, without any regard for the landowner's substantial investment to build it, laws in Arizona and many other states protect the landowner's right to continue operating it indefinitely into the future. Similar sorts of grandfathering laws exist under the federal Americans with Disabilities Act as well. These grandfathering exemptions exist to ensure that changes in policy don't interfere with landowners' ability to fully recoup their investments that they've reasonably made in developing their land based on existing policies. Even states that don't indefinitely protect pre-existing non-conforming land uses do generally protect them for something called an amortization period. Amortization provisions in zoning ordinances exempt pre-existing land uses from a new policy, such as a zoning law, for a specific period of time that is intentionally designed to allow the landowners to fully recoup their investment. These sorts of provisions are consistent with the notion that, except in extreme situations where there are strong countervailing concerns, policy changes should be implemented so as to not undercut reasonable pre-existing investments. Now, SRP's new solar fee proposal not only fails to permanently exempt existing solar energy users, it also denies many of those customers an exemption period that would be long enough to allow them to recoup their upfront investment in their solar array, as they'd reasonably expected to be able to do. Not even Arizona's other large utility, APS, dared to treat existing solar energy users in such an unprecedented way in its recent campaign for solar user fees. Ironically, as recent as November of 2014, SRP displayed a very different sort of view on these very issues when the profitability of the utility's own energy investments was on the line. SRP has come out in strong opposition to certain aspects of the EPA's proposed Clean Power Plan, a federal rule that would require the utility to shut down some of its coal-fired power generating capacity. In SRP's official comments on the Clean Power Plan, SRP expressed that it has significant concerns about stranded costs associated with the closing down of these power plants. You know, it's too bad that SRP doesn't have similar concerns about the stranded cost problems that its proposed solar fee policies would create for many of the utility's own solar energy using customers. Okay, look, utilities such as SRP are understandably concerned about how the growth of distributed solar energy and this powerful, increasingly disruptive form of innovation could threaten their long-term business model. However, utilities should also know that policy changes that undercut the reasonable investment-backed expectations of their own customers are not a viable response to these challenges. SRP's board of directors should do what has been done repeatedly in other areas of law. When they make policy changes relating to their customers, they should offer grandfathering exemptions that truly respect stakeholders' pre-existing investments. In this case, that means fully respecting their own customers' investments in rooftop solar energy systems made before SRP made its announcements. Any other approach to this issue would directly contravene a core principle that utilities themselves have relied upon for decades.